Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Major General Bill Rapp. I'm the Commandant of the U.S. Army War College. I am joined today by Major General John Kim, Provost of Army University. And we're going to talk for just a little bit about adapting the Army education enterprise to build strategic mindedness. Now, a couple of clarity comments right up front. We're not talking about educating the strategic level of war. We're not talking about educating to build strategies. We're not talking about education for senior leaders. We're talking at all levels, thinking strategically and building strategic mindedness, and that's what we hope to do. Hope to make four big points here. The first is that thinking actually matters. Thinking is important. The second is that, as the CSA said at lunch today, that we can guarantee we'll get the first war wrong. It's really about building adaptability, mental agility in the force, because cause and effect in areas of complexity will confound our ability to predict well. Third, strategic thinking competencies come from operational experience. They come from the jobs you have, they come from the education you have, and from training that you have. And so it is built throughout a career in all aspects of a career. And finally, you've got to start building these competencies early. And that's what we hope to do today. Can I get the first slide, please? So these are what we consider to be the competencies for thinking strategically. We have up there thinking creatively, critically, and systematically, understanding that cause and effect are often not predictable, that there are second and third order effects to problems that are out there, and you have to not assume things to be true when information starts appearing that it's different. John Maynard Keynes once famously challenged an audience by saying, "I change my opinion when the information changes. What do you do?" We'd be surprised at how many people don't change their opinion when the information changes. It's about employing ethical reasoning frameworks, evaluating contrasting viewpoints, understanding our own biases and how those come in. It's about thinking historically. This idea that history doesn't repeat itself, but it very often rhymes, is an important lesson for all of us to take. I talked about the biases and assumptions, about drawing valid conclusions. I see a lot of information. Is my conclusion actually valid? It comes to be about thinking like these things. And at the end of the day, it's about driving innovation and change in very complex organizations. So that's what we hope to do. This is what we call thinking strategically and building strategic mindedness. And what we hope to do today is talk about how we are adapting the entire education enterprise to build these competencies. Next slide, please. We call this the temple chart, but the temple chart starts with a foundation of enablers. Enablers like ethical reasoning, collaboration, intellectual risk-taking. And from those, there come these pillars that we just talked about that build up to being a strategic thinker. And that can be a strategic leader or a planner, a theorist or a practitioner. But all of that is superimposed on jobs. Jobs you get from the experiences that you have operationally or within the enterprise, the education opportunities that you have, and the training that you have. And I'm a firm believer that training and education are different enterprises. You train somebody on how to do something, you educate people on how to think about things. Both are important. And with that, I'll turn it over to General Kim.
It's great to be here, everybody. One of the things that I'd like to highlight, and one of the reasons the Army stood up the Army University, and we're really in the early stages, the first year of putting all that together, is the Army's always been a little bit bipolar, is my term, between training and education, experiential learning. How does that come together to build professional soldiers and professional civilians in our DA civilian? And so that's one of the reasons the Army U came together. General Rapp is our Vice Provost for strategy. My boss, Lieutenant General Lundy, is the Vice Provost for training and education, because those things go together. You can't separate them. So a lot of work, and we're going to go through that in a minute, on the mid-career level. How do you bring together professional military education for warrant officers, NCOs, officers, and civilians at the right echelons at the right time to achieve something. And to what level of knowledge, right? When I was a brand new second lieutenant, sometimes you needed basic knowledge on how something operates. You weren't really going to be the expert on employing it. You need to go get operational experience to do that. And so a lot of the effort that you see here, you build over time. But you can't wait to start. And you need to have it nested and synced together to try to build over time. So that's what we're trying to do across the Army enterprise. And I'd really like to reemphasize what General Rapp said, because many people we tend to focus on tactical, operational, strategic. We default to what we do in Washington a lot, which is strategic planning. What are the COCOMs doing? But that's not really what we're talking about. He gave a great description of strategic mindedness. And who wouldn't want a squad leader or a general officer and a command sergeant major thinking with an ethical reasoning framework, making valid conclusions, thinking creatively, looking from other viewpoints? That applies regardless of whether you're in what training education forum you're in, or whether you're an operational unit or institutional unit. So next slide, please. A little hard to read from where you're at, but one of the things this is trying to say is we have a vertically and horizontally aligned professional military education system. When you look on here, none of those schools will be a surprise to almost anybody, right? The Advanced Leader Course, Basic Leader Course for NCOs, up through the Sergeant Major's Academy. For officers, BOLIC, Captain's Career Course, CGSC, and eventually the War College. On the far right, you see the civilians, and we also have warrant officer education. And what this is trying to say is there's things to be shared, to pass, to understand horizontally. Okay, that's the first step. For example, Mission Command. Until about a year ago, and we're still working through it, we didn't teach Mission Command except for the Sergeant Major's Academy and the Captain's Career Course through the War College for officers. None for warrant officers, right? None for DA civilians, none for ALC, SLC. So you think about that, why would you not want a first sergeant and a company commander, even if the class is slightly different because they do slightly different things, to have a good background on what should a company commander expect his first sergeant to know, understand, or how to implement mission command in an organization, right? Wouldn't you want to know, as a brand new platoon leader, what your squad leader might know about mission command? They don't have to be an expert, but do they have basic knowledge, or is it a totally new vernacular to them? So this is one of those ways where we try to look across and make sure at the right levels we're synced for the right things. The second real challenge is, and you see the blue arrows, and they're not, there's no perfect magic to them, but it's about breadth and depth, right? We have a challenge in our Army on trying to figure out when is the appropriate time for depth and breadth. Because everybody really, ultimately you want both, right? Lots of people want both, okay? But, for example, for warrant officers, they are the depth and the expertise that we need. That's why we have a warrant officer corps, right? Do some warrant officers need breadth at some point? Absolutely, right? At some point, some warrant officers are advising division commanders, working with senior officials, working with contracting command on major challenges with tank programs and the breadth of things they do, okay? Is that what a CW2 does? Not really, okay? So when is the right time when you might need the breadth, right? And do we have the right depth at that moment? Are we investing where we really need the most bang for the buck, right? In an Army focused on readiness and being more functional, when is the right moment? That same thing for NCOs, right? When you're up through company to battalion level, your focus is on battalion operations. So are our schoolhouses properly preparing us with the functional skills we need? But you can't separate. You can't just all of a sudden turn a light switch on, like General Rapp said, and all of a sudden at the 16, 20-year mark going, now be a critical creative thinker, right? It's not a one-week class, okay? And so there are some things you need to start early on, and then things you build on over time. And so this tries to capture some of that in many ways. And then it transcends branches, right? Some branches need certain things earlier, okay? Do we have the flexibility in our curriculum and the rigor to do things at the right level? A great example is for air defense, right? Does your average air defense person who works stat, an officer, works stat and Patriot, do they really ever do MDMP in the traditional BCT operations mode? No, they don't. They really start at joint doctrine, right? So do we have in our schoolhouses the right fidelity and the right curriculum to be flexible enough to give the right people, so we're not always delivering the same thing regardless of whether you need it or not, like we've sometimes done in the past. So that's both an efficiency and an effectiveness thing, but ultimately through all those things, we're trying to make sure we're inculcating the ethical reasoning, the critical creative thinking, right? Even as you're becoming more functionally able to do your job, unless you're really good tactically, you can't be innovative. So what are the fundamentals, and then how are we setting the conditions so when you're at the right moment, you're already ready to operate at the next level? Next slide. So one of the ways we've tried to do that is the Army's never had a framework to look across cohorts. Okay? So over the last year, a group of folks got together, took what used to be the knowledge, skills, and attributes. We had lots of different learning outcomes. I think we had 196 for non-commissioned officers, 194 for officers, something like 38 for our Department of Army civilians. All you couldn't make heads or tails. And for me, if I can't do it in fingers and toes, if it's more than 20, I lose track. So we worked really hard, and we have 4 Army learning areas, 14 general learning outcomes, and those become the driver in our professional military education for trying to bin and synthesize what we're doing. Right? So now you think about, this is an example for mission command. We want soldiers to be able to demonstrate proficiency in mission command philosophy. We want them in mission command, leader, and commander tasks. So you could now break that out in our Common Core, right? When we're looking at the Captain's Career Course and Advanced Leader Course for NCOs, you can now look and say which of these apply, and more importantly, what level of knowledge? Are we talking basic knowledge, or is it more senior where you need to be able to do synthesis and really set conditions versus just have some basic comprehension? Because ultimately, what does that do? That's really the outcome. That's mission command and education saying, we want this person to get to this outcome. Here's some general framework for how to do the course, but as long as you achieve that, you can adapt how you want. You're an engineer teaching it, you can use engineer examples. You can adapt it how you want. You're at the aviation school, you adapt it how you want, but you have to achieve this outcome because that's what the Army needs. We need a captain here and a captain there, or a staff sergeant here and a staff sergeant there, if there's a common outcome, to know what that means, right? Because that's their expectation. And then on my Army U hat, we need that because how can you do credentials and accreditation and all those things towards education if you can't kind of know that the outcome is happening, right? We don't want to be sitting back grading 10,000 papers from afar. We want to have a system that says we know they're achieving the outcome. Anybody who graduated from that or completed that course, we know they can do the job. So that's kind of what you get out of this. And in the ultimate measure, you know, the Army's adaptive. We're always having things come in and come out of what's the focus of the day, right? Great example, Command General Staff College. Increased focus, obviously, on Objective T and all the efforts the Army's doing this year on training, right? And the new FM70. Well, the course is already pretty full. Where does that come in? Well, now this allows us to go through there and go, if we want to add that time, where do we want to adjust? And how are we going to adjust learning levels to be able to achieve those outcomes? Because at some point, you can't add to the course. We're not adding a second year. We're not adding weeks to course. We can't afford that, right? We need to use this as a balancing stick. But as you go through those, look at that language. This is about helping people think better, be better at your functional skills, but then be ready to think and adapt and do it better, faster, stronger. Next slide, please. One example of that where we're really focused this coming year, and the Chief of Staff, the Sergeant Major of the Army, and along with my boss, General Perkins and General Lundy, have asked us to look very aggressively, and we're working on it now, on an Army University through the Command General Staff College degree program at the Sergeant Major's Academy. Now there's already opportunities for Sergeant Majors down there through local universities and other places to work on a degree. Some have already got a bachelor's degree, so they're working on their master's degree. Some don't, and they're working on a bachelor's there. What we're trying to now do is, how do we bring together the experiential learning that you get as a leader? You know, who leads better than the NCOs in our Army? And whatever education they've done through voluntary education. And then what we teach at the Sergeant Major's Academy is we work that curriculum and have a model that will allow them to, depending on where they come in, to have a bachelor's degree at the end of that year. So why is that important? Because now this is the Army focused on what we want those outcomes to be. If we want more critical creative thinking, we want ethical reasoning, that's already in the curriculum there. But how do we roll that together so that Sergeant Majors can have a little more specialization? Okay, so you have a common core for them. But if you're a sustainment Sergeant Major, what you might want to do might be a little different, where you want to focus some electives than a combat arms Sergeant Major, right? And someone who's going to be a contracting Command Sergeant Major or going off, like I said, a joint job, and they know that, they might need some different things. Right now, there's no electives at the Sergeant Major's Academy. So there is no specialization. We're not trying to make them all different, but we like the idea of, and now you can focus, and we'll have the focus will be on the common areas you'd expect: leader development, organizational management, critical creative thinking, project management, the things that NCOs do, right? And now they'll be able to specialize and go deeper, right? And so if they have a passion for something, now there's a passion to allow them to go deeper in the curriculum and get to that strategic mindedness. So that we have sergeant majors that are advising these senior commanders with all the right skills and attributes and make them even better than they are today. Because as we heard earlier today from General Milley, General Rapp commented, you know, the sergeant major of 2030, the sergeant major of the Army is in our formation now. So what are we doing to get them ready? And I'll pass it back to General Rapp.
Next slide, please. So just as Army University through TRADOC is working student outcomes and looking across the whole enterprise of education through TRADOC, we at the U.S. Army War College are also adapting our courses to build better strategic mindedness. The courses that we teach primarily are up here. A couple of note that you might not know. Executive Leaders course is for nominative command sergeant majors, a 2-week course that really introduces them to upper level concepts, this idea that we have been raised that there are right and wrong answers. And in fact, I think that the first use of essay tests rather than just true or false questions or multiple choice at sergeant majors or the master's leader course is the first time that NCOs have been faced with this fact that there may not be a right answer to a problem. I would tell you at the strategic level there are rarely right answers. There are some that are more right than others, but they all have somewhat of drawbacks. And how do you think through those? We do that at the Executive Leaders course. Senior Leader Seminar Phase 1 is for colonels, CW5s, and sergeants major. It is after the War College, before general officer. That same thing. It's another touch point. It's another opportunity to be at the sled, as the CSA mentioned today. General officer education has been moved under U.S. Army War College in order to bring some coherency to that enterprise as well. We went back to basics, just as Army University did with General Kim. What are the learning outcomes? What do we expect a brigadier general to know how to do? Major general, lieutenant general. What are those competencies? What are those attributes? And how can we rationalize general officer education? We've brought Joint Professional Military Education Phase 2 to the distance program. And the class of 17 will have the first graduates of our distance program with JPME-2. It's a 2-year master's program there. So across the whole scope of what we're doing at the Army War College and through the community of interest in strategy education, working with TRADOC, working closely with Army University to increase strategic mindedness across the force, because it cannot start here. It has to start in TRADOC. It has to start down in units. Because, you know, just like this place was packed when the Innovation Office was here because they had money. The education enterprise isn't sexy, but people will be the ones that solve the problems in the future, not necessarily technology. And they'll be the ones that can adapt technologies to the problems that they face. You have to build those kind of competencies, and that's why this is such a vitally important enterprise. Any final comments, John?
I think the last comment for me is I've only been in TRADOC for a year, but it's really an amazing time in a lot of ways. And it's very exciting because when you try to bring together where does readiness fit into this, right? Well, as we produce leaders to go back out to the operational units, so they come from operational units back in and they go to the various schools, that's an opportunity to bring together those skills and make them stop and think and get ready for the next place. But the second part is really mission command education. You know, I'm a victim of more than a few courses where you go there and whether you learn it or not, you're going to sit there and get it and be there until you were done. And so this opportunity now to empower instructors in adult learning to go, hey, you have mission command, achieve these outcomes, and you can adapt, and you can bring new things in, and you can bring new technologies in, and you don't have to wait 3 years. You don't have to wait for Chris Rizzo and G3 to finally give you some money. You can innovate now, right? And so those are great opportunities, and it's a very exciting time in our schoolhouses. Thank you.
With that, we'll open up to any questions or comments.